The storm had been threatening all evening, and by 9 p.m. it finally broke. Thunder rolled across downtown Portland like a warning no one heeded. Inside Rosie's Corner Cafe, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot but never quite good, Emma Sullivan wiped down table 14 for the third time that hour. Her blonde hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail, had started to escape in wisps around her face. She was 26, but looked older under the harsh fluorescent lights, the kind of tired that settles into your bones when you've been standing for 11 hours straight. The cafe was nearly empty. Just old Mr. Patterson nursing his decaf in the corner booth, and a couple of college kids hunched over laptops, milking their $2 refills for all they were worth. Emma didn't blame them. She'd been there herself not that long ago. When the door chimed, bringing in a gust of cold air and rain, everyone looked up. The man who entered moved like someone trying to disappear. His coat, if you could call it that, was more holes than fabric, held together by hope and stubbornness. Water dripped from him onto the checkered floor, forming a small puddle that caught the light. Emma saw Gary, the night manager, stiffen behind the counter. She knew that look. It was the same look he got when anyone who didn't fit the cafe's invisible dress code wandered in. The stranger shuffled to a corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that no one ever wanted. He sat down carefully, like his body hurt, and stared at his hands. They were shaking. Gary was already moving, dish towel in hand like a weapon. "Sir," he said, voice sharp enough to cut, "this is a paying establishment." The man didn't look up. I have some money." "How much?" Silence. Gary's face hardened. "That's what I thought. I'm going to need you to." "He can sit at my section," Emma heard herself say. Both men turned to look at her. Gary's expression was half annoyance, half warning. The stranger's face held something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, buried under layers of resignation. "Emma, we've talked about this." "He's not causing any trouble," she said quietly. "And it's a slow night." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" The question hung in the air between them. Gary opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head. "You know what? Fine. But when he can't pay, that's coming out of your tips." He walked away, muttering something about bleeding hearts and business. Emma grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her heart beating harder than the situation warranted. As she approached the table, the man looked up, and for just a second she saw his eyes. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and absolutely exhausted. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was different than she expected. Educated, careful. "Don't mention it." She set down the water. "Are you hungry?" Yes, but I only have. The soup special's pretty good tonight," she interrupted. "Vegetable barley. Comes with bread." "I can't really afford." "It's on me," Emma said, surprising herself. "Consider it a rainy day special." The man stared at her for a long moment. "Why?" It was such a simple question, but it hit her harder than expected. Why? Because her grandmother used to say you should always feed a hungry person. Because 6 months ago she'd been behind on rent and someone had helped her. Because he reminded her of her father before the stroke, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart. "Because it's cold," she said finally. "And you're wet. And everybody needs soup sometimes." She turned to go before he could argue. "Wait," he called softly. "What's your name?" "Emma." "I'm Walter," he said, "and I won't forget this, Emma." She smiled, tired but genuine. "You don't have to remember. Just eat and get warm, okay?" Over the next hour, Emma brought him soup, bread, more water, and finally a cup of coffee that was actually fresh. She'd made a new pot just for him. Walter ate slowly, methodically, like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Probably because he hadn't. Gary watched from behind the counter, his disapproval radiating across the room. The college kids packed up and left. Mr. Patterson shuffled out into the rain, collar up against the cold. And still Walter sat, warming his hands on the coffee mug, not saying much. Around 10:30, he stood carefully and approached the counter. Emma was counting her tips for the night, $37, which meant she was $12 short on tomorrow's electric bill. Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. It looked like it had been folded and refolded 100 times. "For the meal," he said, setting it on the counter. Emma looked at the $5, then at Walter. His coat was still soaked. His shoes had holes in them. He needed that money more than she needed her pride satisfied. "You know what?" she said, sliding it back toward him. "My manager gave me grief earlier, so I get one free meal a night. I gave it to you, so this is yours." "I can't take charity," Walter said, and there was something almost fierce in his voice. "It's not charity," Emma said. "It's just one human being helping another. No debt, no strings, just soup on a cold night." Walter's hand trembled as he picked up the $5. For a moment, she thought he might cry. "You have a good heart, Emma Sullivan," he said quietly. "How do you know my last name?" He gestured to her name tag. She'd forgotten she was wearing it. "Right," she laughed, embarrassed. "Well, stay safe out there, Walter." He nodded, tucked the $5 carefully back into his pocket, and walked out into the storm. Emma watched him go, then turned back to her tips. $37, $12 short. She sighed and started cleaning up, unaware that everything had just changed. What Emma didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Walter wasn't just some homeless man seeking shelter from the rain. His real name was Walter Eugene Hartwell, and he was worth approximately $4 billion. 6 weeks earlier, Walter had received the kind of news that makes time stop. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, inoperable. 6 months, maybe 8 if he was lucky, which he wasn't feeling particularly lucky about. He'd sat in that doctor's office, wood paneling and expensive art on the walls, and felt nothing. No fear, no sadness, just a vast, hollow numbness. When he told his family, their reactions had been predictable and crushing. His eldest son, Charles, had immediately started asking questions about the succession plan. His daughter, Victoria, had gotten that tight smile she wore when she was calculating. His youngest, Andrew, hadn't even looked up from his phone. "We should probably talk about medical power of attorney," Charles had said, not even an hour after the diagnosis. "I'm not dead yet," Walter had replied. "Of course not, Dad. We're just being practical." Practical. Right. That night, Walter had sat alone in his penthouse apartment, 16,000 square feet of marble and glass and absolute silence, and realized something terrible. He couldn't remember the last time one of his children had asked how he was feeling. Not about business, not about his health, just how he was. The realization had been devastating. He'd spent 50 years building Hartwell Industries from a single manufacturing plant into a global empire. He'd worked 18-hour days, missed birthdays and school plays and family dinners. All of it, he told himself, was for them, for his legacy, for his family. But somewhere along the way, he'd raised children who saw him as a bank account, not a father. Charles was 38 and had never held a job that Walter hadn't given him. Victoria was 35 and spent most of her time married to various wealthy men, collecting divorce settlements. Andrew was 29 and, as far as Walter could tell, had no ambitions beyond expensive cars and expensive parties. They were waiting for him to die, and when he did, they'd tear apart everything he'd built like wolves on a carcass. The thought had kept him awake for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, Walter had an idea. It was crazy, possibly cruel, but it wouldn't let him go. He needed to know if there was anyone left in the world who would show kindness without a profit motive, who would help without expecting anything in return. He needed to know if humanity still existed outside of boardrooms and inheritance lawyers and people who called him Sir. So he'd done something he hadn't done since he was a young man. He'd walked away from everything. No drivers, no assistants, no security. Just Walter in his oldest clothes, his wallet deliberately light, wandering the city like a ghost. The first day had been illuminating in the worst possible way. He'd gone to the Four Seasons, where he'd been a regular for 20 years, and asked to use the restroom. Security had escorted him out before he got 3 steps inside. He'd tried a high-end restaurant where he'd once held a business dinner for 50 people. The maitre d' had looked through him like he was invisible. Department stores, coffee shops, even a church. Everywhere, the message was the same. If you don't have money, you don't have value. By the time he'd stumbled into Rosie's Corner Cafe that rainy night, Walter had been ready to give up on people entirely. And then there was Emma. She hadn't known who he was. She hadn't expected anything from him. She'd just seen someone cold and hungry and alone, and she'd done the decent thing. When she'd refused his $5 that probably meant more to her than 1,000 did to him, Walter had felt something shift in his chest. This woman, working herself to exhaustion for tips that wouldn't cover her bills, had given freely. Not for recognition, not for reward, just because it was right. Sitting in the back of his car later that night, still damp from the rain, Walter had made a decision. His lawyer thought he was insane. "Walter, I need you to understand what you're proposing," Richard Chen had said, reading glasses perched on his nose. "You want to leave your entire estate, all $4 billion, plus controlling interest in Hartwell Industries, to a woman you met once in a cafe? Yes. A waitress named Emma Sullivan who has no idea who you are. Correct. Your children will contest this, viciously. Let them." Richard had sat back in his chair, studying Walter with the careful gaze of someone who'd known him for 30 years. Why? Walter had thought about how to answer that. Because my children have shown me who they are. Emma showed me who she is. And I would rather my life's work go to someone with character than someone with my last name. They'll call her a con artist. They'll drag her through the mud. Then we protect her. Make it ironclad. She doesn't find out until after I'm gone. By then, the will is executed and there's nothing they can do. Walter, Richard, I'm dying, and I don't want my legacy to be 3 spoiled adults fighting over money they didn't earn. I want it to be something that actually matters. Richard had been quiet for a long time. Then he'd pulled out a legal pad and started writing. The next 3 months were a carefully orchestrated performance. Walter continued his regular business meetings. He attended family dinners. He played the role of dying patriarch while his children circled like sharks. But privately, he worked with Richard to build something unprecedented. Trust structures, safeguards, contingencies for every possible challenge. Everything designed to ensure that when the time came, Emma Sullivan would inherit an empire, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop it. Charles grew more aggressive, pushing for early distribution of assets to minimize tax burden. Victoria suddenly became attentive, visiting weekly with carefully measured concern. Andrew actually showed up to a board meeting, which was suspicious enough on its own. They smelled blood in the water. Walter let them circle. In his private moments, he thought about Emma. He'd had her investigated, not to find dirt, but to understand who she was. The report had been illuminating. Emma Marie Sullivan, 26, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12, put herself through 2 years of community college before running out of money, worked at Rosie's Corner Cafe for 3 years, made approximately $28,000 annually, most of which went to her grandmother's nursing home care. No criminal record, no scandals, just a woman working herself to the bone to take care of the person who'd raised her. The investigator's final note had been simple. Subject demonstrates consistent pattern of helping others despite limited personal resources. Well regarded by community members. No evidence of material ambition. In other words, she was exactly who she'd appeared to be that rainy night. Genuine. That was the word Walter kept coming back to. In a world where everything was transaction and pretense, Emma Sullivan was genuinely good. His children were going to hate her. Walter found he didn't care. The end came faster than expected. Cancer, it turned out, didn't respect timelines or unfinished business. Walter's last conscious thought, lying in a hospital bed with machines beeping around him and his children in the hallway arguing about funeral arrangements, was of a small cafe, rain on the windows, and a tired blonde woman who'd given soup to a stranger he hoped she would understand. The will reading happened on a gray Tuesday afternoon in the Hartwell Industries conference room. 47th floor, views of the entire city. Charles, Victoria, and Andrew sat in leather chairs, dressed in black, their grief as carefully tailored as their suits. Richard Chen stood at the head of the table, the will in front of him like a bomb waiting to detonate. "Before we begin," Richard said carefully, "I want to acknowledge that this is a difficult time. Walter was very specific about his wishes. I need you to understand that this document was reviewed, revised, and confirmed multiple times over the past 3 months. Walter was of completely sound mind throughout the entire process." Charles frowned. "Why do you feel the need to say that?" "You'll see." Richard opened the folder. The initial bequests were small, personal items, a few charitable donations. Charles got Walter's watch collection. Victoria got their mother's jewelry. Andrew got the vintage car collection. "And the rest?" Charles asked impatiently. The company? The real estate portfolio? The liquid assets? Richard took a breath. The remainder of Walter Eugene Hartwell's estate, including all controlling interest in Hartwell Industries, all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets totaling approximately $4.2 billion, is hereby bequeathed to Miss Emma Marie Sullivan of Portland, Oregon. The silence was absolute. I'm sorry, Victoria said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. Did you say Emma Sullivan? Yes. Who the hell is Emma Sullivan? Charles demanded. A waitress your father met approximately 3 months ago. The explosion was immediate and volcanic. This is insane. He was clearly not of sound mind. A waitress? A random waitress gets everything? We'll contest this. We'll bury her in legal fees. Enough, Richard said sharply. I anticipated these reactions, which is why I'm prepared to provide you with comprehensive medical evaluations, psychiatric assessments, and video testimony from Walter himself, all confirming his complete mental competency. This will is unbreakable. I made sure of it. Why? Victoria whispered, and for the first time she sounded genuinely hurt rather than angry. Why would he do this to us? Richard looked at her for a long moment. He left you a letter. Each of you. He slid 3 envelopes across the table. Charles tore his open first. Inside was a single handwritten page. Charles, I gave you every advantage, the best schools, the best opportunities, jobs you didn't earn, and wealth you didn't build. I told myself I was preparing you for leadership, but I failed you, because I taught you to value money without teaching you to value people. Emma Sullivan gave soup to a stranger without expecting anything in return. In that single act, she showed more character than you've shown in 38 years. My hope is that losing this fortune will teach you what having it never did. Your father. Victoria's letter was similar. Andrew's even more blunt. They sat in silence, these 3 inheritors of nothing, holding papers that burned like accusations. We're still contesting this, Charles said finally, his voice hollow. This woman manipulated him. She doesn't even know yet, Richard interrupted. Emma Sullivan has no idea any of this is happening, which rather undermines the manipulation narrative, doesn't it? He gathered his papers. The estate is settled. The company has already been transferred. You're welcome to pursue legal action, but I promise you, it will go nowhere. Walter made certain of that. Then what are we supposed to do? Victoria asked. Richard paused at the door. I suppose, he said quietly, you could try getting a job. He left them there, 3 people who'd spent their lives waiting for their father to die, only to discover he'd left them the one thing they'd never wanted, the chance to become their own people. Emma was in the middle of her Wednesday lunch shift when the black car pulled up outside Rosie's Corner Cafe. She noticed it because it was the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Long, expensive, the kind of vehicle that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. A man in a suit stepped out. He looked around, spotted the cafe, and walked inside. Gary immediately went into customer service mode and all smiles and accommodations. Good afternoon, sir. Table for 1? I'm looking for Emma Sullivan. Every head in the cafe turned. Emma felt her stomach drop. Men in expensive suits showing up looking for you by name was never good news. Had something happened to her grandmother? Was this about those medical bills? Had she finally missed one payment too many and... I'm Emma, she heard herself say. The man approached and his expression was kind. Miss Sullivan, my name is Richard Chen. I'm an attorney. Is there somewhere private we could talk? I'm working. I'll cover her shift, Gary said immediately, which was suspicious in itself. Gary never offered to do anything. What's this about? Emma asked, her hands twisting in her apron. It's about Walter Hartwell, Richard said gently. The name took a moment to place. Walter? The man from... It's been months. Is he okay? Perhaps we should sit down. They ended up in the corner booth, the one with the wobbly leg, the one where Walter had sat that rainy night. Miss Sullivan, Richard began, I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible. Okay. The man you met in this cafe 3 months ago, the man you gave soup to, his real name was Walter Eugene Hartwell. He was the founder and CEO of Hartwell Industries. Emma stared at him. The technology company? The one with the big building downtown? Yes. And approximately 3 weeks ago, Walter passed away from pancreatic cancer. Oh, Emma said softly. I'm sorry. He seemed like a kind man. He was, which brings me to why I'm here. Richard pulled out a folder. Walter left a will, and in that will, he named you as the primary beneficiary of his entire estate. Emma blinked. I don't understand. He left everything to you, Miss Sullivan. The company, the properties, his investment portfolios, approximately $4.2 billion. The words hit her like a physical blow. I'm sorry, what? You're a billionaire, Miss Sullivan. Emma laughed. It was automatic, absurd. No, that's insane. I gave him soup. You don't give someone $4 billion for soup. You gave him something more valuable, Richard said quietly. You gave him dignity when he had nothing to offer in return. You restored his faith in human nature. But I wasn't trying to. That's exactly why you're sitting here. Emma's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. This was a scam or a mistake or... I have documentation, Richard said, sliding papers across the table. Financial statements, legal documents, all requiring your signature. Emma looked at the numbers and felt dizzy. Why me? Because you were kind without expecting reward. Because you saw a person, not a transaction. Because in a world where Walter's own children treated him like an inheritance rather than a father, you treated him like a human being. His children are currently very unhappy, Richard said with a slight smile. But the will is ironclad. This is real, Miss Sullivan, and it's yours. Emma sat back, her mind reeling. She thought about her grandmother, about medical bills and night shifts, and the electric company threatening disconnection. She thought about her empty refrigerator and the shoes she'd been wearing for 3 years. And then she thought about Walter, cold and shaking, wrapped around a coffee mug. What would he want me to do with it? She asked quietly. Richard smiled fully then. He told me, and I quote, I hope she does something that matters. Emma looked down at her hands, waitress hands, tired hands, hands that had given soup to a stranger on a rainy night. Okay, she said finally, then I guess we have work to do. The media descended like locusts. Waitress inherits billions ran on every news site. Hartwell's shocking will dominated the financial channels. The story had everything: wealth, mystery, a Cinderella angle that made for perfect headlines. Emma's face was plastered everywhere. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Her phone rang constantly with numbers she didn't recognize. The Hartwell children went on television, carefully composed, calling her a con artist. Our father was sick, Victoria said on national TV, dabbing at dry eyes. This woman clearly took advantage. Emma didn't respond. Richard had advised her to stay quiet, and she was grateful for the guidance. Instead, she did something unexpected. She went back to work. The photographers went crazy when Emma Sullivan, newly minted billionaire, showed up for her Thursday shift at Rosie's Corner Cafe in her usual uniform. Why are you still here? Gary had asked, genuinely confused. Because I said I'd work Thursday, Emma replied, and I don't break promises. That image, Emma pouring coffee in a diner while technically worth billions, went viral instantly. People loved it, or hated it. There didn't seem to be much middle ground. But Emma didn't care about the media narrative. She was busy figuring out what to do with an empire she'd never asked for. The first thing she did was visit Hartwell Industries headquarters. Walking into that building felt like entering another planet. Marble floors, glass walls, people in suits that cost more than her car. The board of directors treated her with barely concealed contempt. She was an interloper, an accident, a waitress playing dress-up. Miss Sullivan, the CFO said with a condescending smile, perhaps it would be best if you signed over operational control to those of us with actual business experience. Emma had looked at him calmly. No. I'm sorry. I said no. Walter left this to me, not to you. So I'm going to learn how it works, and then I'm going to run it. You're welcome to help me or find employment elsewhere. The room had gone silent. Now, Emma continued, I'd like to see the employee records, starting with average wages compared to executive compensation. That's when they realized she wasn't going to be a figurehead. Over the next 6 months, Emma did something radical. She actually cared. She met with workers on factory floors, not just in boardrooms. She listened to complaints about benefits and working conditions. She asked questions that made executives uncomfortable. Why do we have such high turnover in manufacturing? Because they're unskilled labor, Miss Sullivan. They're easily replaced. They're human beings. Emma had said quietly, and if we're losing people constantly, maybe we're the problem. She raised minimum wages across all Hartwell Industries properties. She improved healthcare benefits. She created childcare programs and tuition assistance. The board predicted disaster. The stock, they said, would tank. Instead, productivity went up. Retention improved. And when word got out that Hartwell Industries was treating employees like people, the company's reputation transformed. Applications flooded in. The best talent wanted to work somewhere that valued them. Emma's approach was simple. Treat people the way you'd want to be treated when you had nothing. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be seen as disposable. She refused to let anyone at Hartwell Industries feel that way. The Hartwell children sued, of course. Charles filed first, claiming undue influence. Victoria followed with allegations of mental incompetence. Andrew just signed whatever his siblings put in front of him. Each case was dismissed. The final hearing was particularly devastating for them. The judge had reviewed all the evidence, medical records, psychiatric evaluations, Walter's own video testimony, and made his ruling. Mr. Hartwell was clearly of sound mind when he made this decision. Miss Sullivan never sought this inheritance, never even knew of its existence until after Mr. Hartwell's death. There is no evidence of manipulation, no evidence of undue influence. What I see is a man making a conscious choice about who should carry forward his legacy. He looked at Charles, Victoria, and Andrew with something like pity. Your father left you a message in his will. Perhaps it's time you actually listened to it. Case dismissed. Final. Emma had sat in that courtroom, watching three people who'd been born into wealth lose everything, and she'd felt no triumph, just sadness. After the verdict, she'd approached them in the hallway. I'm sorry, she'd said quietly. I know you don't believe that, but I am. Victoria had glared at her with pure venom. You stole our inheritance. No, Emma said, I was kind to your father when he was cold and hungry. That's all I did. I didn't know who he was. I didn't want anything from him. I just saw someone who needed help. And you expect us to believe that? Emma had looked at her for a long moment. Honestly, I don't care if you believe it or not, but I'm going to ask you something anyway. Did you ever ask your father how he was feeling? Not about business, not about money, just how he was. The silence was answer enough. I thought so, Emma said softly. He didn't leave you money. He left you a lesson. What you do with it is up to you. She'd walked away, leaving them in that courthouse hallway, three people finally forced to confront what they'd become. 2 years later, Emma sat in Walter's old office, her office now, watching the city lights come on as evening fell. The view was still stunning, but she'd changed everything else. The cold marble was gone, replaced with warm wood. The intimidating desk had been swapped for something human-sized. Photos lined the walls. Her grandmother, the cafe staff, groups of Hartwell employees at company events where everyone was actually smiling. And in the center, a small framed photo of Walter, taken from the security camera footage of that rainy night. Him sitting in the corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking at Emma with something like hope. She thought about him often. The empire had grown under her leadership, but it had also transformed. Hartwell Industries was now as known for its humanitarian efforts as its technology. The company funded shelters, scholarship programs, medical clinics in underserved communities. Emma had started a program she called the Second Chance Initiative, helping people who'd fallen on hard times get back on their feet with job training, housing assistance, and real support. She thought Walter would have approved. Her grandmother had passed peacefully 8 months ago in a good facility with excellent care, holding Emma's hand. Her last words had been, "Your grandfather would be so proud of you, sweet girl." Emma missed her every day. The Hartwell siblings had vanished from public life. Charles was rumored to be working for a mid-level consulting firm. Victoria had moved to Europe. Andrew had apparently discovered meditation and sobriety, which Emma genuinely hoped worked out for him. She still worked one shift a week at Rosie's Corner Cafe. Gary thought she was crazy, but he'd stopped arguing about it. Why do you keep coming back? A new waitress had asked last week. Emma had smiled. Because this is where I learned that kindness matters. I don't ever want to forget that. Now, sitting in this office worth millions, Emma thought about the questions she'd been asked constantly over the past 2 years. If she could go back, would she change anything? Would she have kept the $5, ignored Walter, stayed safe instead of risking her tips on a stranger's soup? The answer was always the same: no. Because that night in the cafe, she'd been herself, genuinely, completely herself. She hadn't been performing or calculating or trying to impress anyone. She'd just been human. And somehow, impossibly, that had been enough. Emma picked up her phone and looked at the message she'd been composing for the last hour. It was to a young woman who'd written to her, a cashier in Detroit who'd given her lunch to a homeless veteran and wanted to know if she'd done the right thing. Emma typed, "You did the right thing, not because it might lead somewhere, but because kindness is always right, even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. Whatever happens next, you'll know you were true to yourself, and that's worth more than any inheritance. Keep being kind." Emma, she hit send and stood, gathering her things. Tomorrow there were meetings, decisions about expansion into renewable energy, a new scholarship program to launch. But tonight, she was going home to her modest apartment, she'd never moved despite the board's horror, to eat leftover soup and remember that underneath all the zeros in her bank account, she was still just Emma. A woman who'd given soup to a stranger. And that, she'd learned, was the most valuable thing she'd ever been. In a world obsessed with wealth, sometimes the greatest fortune is found in the smallest acts of kindness, not because they might be rewarded, but because being human is its own reward.